Alright, let me start this video off by saying, if anybody really wants to nitpick or argue about this with me, go right ahead. Hit me up in the comments, and please do hit me up in the comments, or make a video and send it to me, or whatever you got to do. Get my attention in some fashion. I'd say the comments is the easiest way to do it, but yeah, I'm pretty sure you could post videos in the comments too. I've done it before. I know that it gets tricky with live streams, but I know when you actually just post a link in the comments themselves on YouTube, they usually show up, and hopefully it doesn't get flagged for spam because that shit is tough to find. But regardless, if you got a problem with me ranking Roman Gonzalez number one pound for pound, I welcome your criticism and I welcome your critique, but you need to be coming at me with facts if you expect me to take you seriously. And you need to be coming at me with facts of the present day, not talking about what people did in years or decades bygone. Because Roy Jones Jr. is still active, and Roy Jones Jr. ain't in anybody's top 10 pound for pound. That's just what it is, man. All time, Roy Jones is one of the all time greatest, man. He's one of the best fighters ever. There is no denying that, period, point blank. But as of right now, getting knocked out by people who most people can't even pronounce their name correctly. Albeit that's a pretty ignorant way to say it, but it is what it is. He's getting knocked out by guys who wouldn't have touched him in his prime. Let's just put it that way. Who wouldn't have touched him in his prime? Who wouldn't have even he would have who guys who would have gotten knocked out by guys that Roy knocked out in his prime are knocking him out. That's how bad it is. But hey, it's all good. I'm glad that Roy's still healthy. But in any case, a lot of people don't seem to grasp the concept of pound for pound in the full terms of what it means. Pound for pound isn't just about a resume. It's not just about an accomplishment. Pound for pound is about achievement as well as ability. It's about showing off that ability and achieving highly with that ability. Who you're achieving that against makes a big difference, and then how you're looking against high levels of opposition is what makes the difference. Now, Roman Gonzalez has been a world champion since 2008. So this isn't just a guy that kind of came around and like all of a sudden people are just looking to crown him because they're arbitrarily looking for somebody to make the pound for pound number one. That's not the case. The fact of the matter is the pound for pound rankings have a history of when one fighter either loses or retires, then the fighter that's number 2 pound for pound ascends. Kind of like when you have a weight class. If the top fighter doesn't lose to the number 2 fighter, but say loses to the number 8 fighter or the number 12 fighter or the number 70 fighter, then they drop out of the rankings. Vernon Forrest was by far the number 1 welterweight on the planet. When he lost to Ricardo Mayorga, got knocked out by Ricardo Mayorga, he was no longer the number 1 fighter at welterweight. And guess what? Ricardo Mayorga, by and large, wasn't recognized as the number 1 fighter at welterweight either. There were still people that put other fighters ahead of Mayorga. Because, a lot of people thought it was a fluke. But, that's something that just kind of goes to other things. People still ranked other fighters higher than him. With that said, though, Floyd Mayweather officially announced his retirement. That is the reason why Roman Gonzalez is the pound for pound number 1. Because before Floyd Mayweather announced his retirement, he was the pound for pound number 2. Now, in this video, I may not be able to get to Gonzalez, the reason why he got to number 2, because I'm under a little bit of a time limit here. But I'm going to go back through the history of the pound for pound ranking itself, because Gonzalez's history only goes back a few months. Okay, so Floyd Mayweather retired. He's currently retired right now. Gonzalez became the pound-for-pound number one. This isn't unprecedented because Floyd Mayweather previously, quote-unquote, retired, and it was only then that Manny Pacquiao became the pound-for-pound number one fighter. Between the Ricky Hatton fight and the Juan Manuel Marquez fight, which was a comeback fight, a lot of you forget about that. That was a comeback fight, and the only reason why Mayweather took that fight was because Marquez called him out by name. And so Floyd Mayweather said, well, shit, this man called me out by name. I'm going to come out of retirement and beat him. And matter of fact, this man is a guy that Manny Pacquiao is ducking. I'm going to come out and beat him. I'm going to beat him conclusively. That's what Floyd did. The other time that Floyd did this was when he was on a vacation of sorts, partially due to his incarceration, but, you know, just in general, inactive, was between the Miguel Cotto and the Robert Guerrero fight. At that time, around that time, the general period around that time, you know, because he was generally kind of inactive around, you know, even before being incarcerated over those charges. Andre Ward was engaging in the Super Six, won the Super Six in very impressive fashion. You know, clearly won all of those fights that he had in that tournament. Then went on to dominate and stop the lineal light heavyweight champion in Chad Dawson. Albeit at a weight where Dawson was clearly weight drained, we can see that in retrospect. But even still, it's similar to the Pacquiao De La Hoya situation. You know, De La Hoya was weight drained in the Pacquiao fight, but at the same time, that was De La Hoya's own fault. And De La Hoya was also coming off of, you know, he wasn't a champion, he wasn't a reigning champion the way Dawson was. But, I mean, enough with the nitpicking about all that crap. Basically, Andre Ward ascended to the number one position, at least in an arguable sense. A lot of people put him above Floyd. Some people still had Floyd above him. Some people still had Pacquiao above both. Or, you know, they were 1, 2, 3, basically. But that was largely due to Floyd's inactivity and or kind of on and off retirement, talking about saying that he didn't want to fight anymore and all that good stuff. Now, Floyd Mayweather didn't ascend to the pound-for-pound number one spot until Bernard Hopkins lost to Jermaine Taylor. Before that happened, Floyd Mayweather was not the number one fighter. He was literally right behind Bernard Hopkins. Hopkins losing to Taylor opened up the door for Mayweather to become the number one. Hopkins dropped to, I think, probably around like 6 or 5. After that fight, after the second fight, I think Hopkins probably rose a little bit after the second fight from where he initially dropped to. You know, that first fight hurt him, but you know, it was a controversial nature of the first fight and the second fight. Really, that kind of helped Hopkins maintain his status as opposed to getting knocked out of the top 10 altogether. Which will bring me to another fighter in just a second. But Floyd Mayweather ascended due to Hopkins losing. As a matter of fact, he actually kind of leapfrogged over a couple fighters that could have had an argument over him, namely Winky Wright. Winky Wright was another guy that was right there in the range that could have potentially ascended to number one. Winky Wright, unfortunately, though, similar to, for instance, a Guillermo Rigondeaux, was having a tough time getting fights, but he was also being real hardball with fights that he was accepting. And you would see that later again, too, when he eventually fought Jermaine Taylor, and then he started demanding equal pay to Jermaine Taylor, which was like an insane amount of money, and he was getting offered way more money than he had ever made before, including the first fight for the Taylor rematch. He turned it down, and that ultimately harmed Winky Wright's career. And so you could see that Winky Wright's kind of hard-headedness in the negotiation room harmed him overall. But getting back to Floyd Mayweather and Bernard Hopkins. Floyd ascended when Hopkins lost to Jermaine Taylor. Bernard Hopkins ascended via a culmination of factors. This is a two-parter right here. Bernard Hopkins ascended to the number one pound-for-pound position with two major things happening. One was Shane Mosley losing twice in clear-cut, virtually dominant fashion to Vernon Forrest. Like I said, that name was going to come back up. The other factor was Roy Jones Jr. losing, getting knocked out by Antonio Tarver. Knocked out by Antonio Tarver, then subsequently knocked out by Glenn Johnson. But ultimately, the Tarver knockout is what knocked him off of the top spot, pound for pound. Shane Mosley dropping two dominant decisions to Vernon Forrest is what knocked him out of the pound for pound. In spite of the fact that Shane Mosley had been a guy that was a former lightweight, largely what got Shane Mosley that top spot was jumping from lightweight to welterweight, beating De La Hoya and all that. But it's one of those things where with time, the accomplishments of the past start to fade off into history more so, and so they hold less weight in terms of the current day, which was at that time the current day, that ultimately harmed Shane Mosley, in spite of the fact that he was quote unquote the smaller man against Forrest. They were still at the weight class. Mosley was the champion of that weight class. Forrest didn't make it close. And we wouldn't see Mosley beat that conclusively again for many years until he was well after his prime. Roy Jones now didn't ascend until pretty much a combination of factors as well. It was a combo of Oscar De La Hoya losing that controversial decision to Felix Trinidad, as well as Roy Jones' own ascension to super middleweight, light heavyweight, and basically dominating there. Previous to that, it had been kind of like a neck and neck thing between them two, and De La Hoya wound up kind of ascending off of the big wins over Pernell Whitaker and Julio Cesar Chavez. Pernell Whitaker and Julio Cesar Chavez being two other guys who were pound for pound number ones earlier in the 90s, basically. Chavez was first. Whitaker ascended upon beating Chavez. Because they were both around the same weight class for most of their careers. Chavez started at 130, Whitaker started at 135. Eventually they met at 147. Whitaker beat him. He became the number one. I mean, before Chavez, you had Mike Tyson. Before Mike Tyson, you had Marvin Hagler, and then you can keep going back through history. But the point being that, by and large, fighters don't necessarily just usurp the crown outright. A lot of the times, that crown winds up getting taken by a fighter in the number one fighter's weight class. And then the guy that beat him actually doesn't even ascend to number one. It's the guy that's number two that ascends to number one, and that guy that's number two usually is a fighter that's from an entirely different weight class. Mike Tyson wasn't a middleweight, but he ascended he ascended to the pound for pound crown when he dominated at heavyweight. Unified the titles, destroyed everybody in his path, like damn near nothing seen before, like Jack Dempsey modern day and shit. Ridiculous. Roy Jones wasn't a welterweight. He didn't dethrone Pernell Whitaker or Oscar De La Hoya. Shane Mosley and Hopkins at that time weren't light heavyweights. They didn't dethrone Roy Jones Jr. Floyd Mayweather wasn't a middleweight. He didn't dethrone Bernard Hopkins. Manny Pacquiao and Andre Ward didn't dethrone Floyd Mayweather, and Roman Gonzalez didn't dethrone Floyd Mayweather. It's all about happenstance, who you're fighting, who the top guy loses to, and the aspect of retirement. Of course, Floyd Mayweather retired undefeated, but at the same time, as of right now anyway, he's retired. Rocky Marciano retired undefeated. He wasn't still the best, the number one heavyweight on the planet. I mean, of course, if he would have come out of retirement to fight Floyd Patterson, then it would have been a little bit of a different story. But as he stayed retired, he basically left that throne up for grabs. Same thing with Joe Calzaghe when he retired undefeated. Same thing with Ricardo Lopez when he retired undefeated. I mean, that's just the way it is. So, holla at me if you got anything to talk about. I'm willing.